You were told that money equals power, that if you could pile enough of it in your hands, people would respect you, doors would open, and freedom would be yours. But Machiavelli would have called that the first illusion, because wealth in itself is not power. It is a mirror. It does not elevate you. It exposes you. It does not transform you. It unmasks you. Give a coward money and he becomes louder in his cowardice. Hand a fool riches and he wraps his ignorance in gold. But place wealth in the hands of a disciplined man and you may not even notice what's happening until it's too late, because his power does not announce itself in luxury or applause. It operates in silence, until one day you look up and realize he has quietly taken control. This was Machiavelli's great insight. He never worshipped money as treasure. He examined its effects like a physician studies a disease, coldly, analytically. He saw money not as freedom, but as a weapon. And like all weapons, its true danger lay not in its size, but in the skill of the one who wielded it. Those who failed to understand this became slaves to their own success, even while they celebrated it. Most men never grasp this. They chase salaries, promotions, houses, the external signals of wealth, believing each step is progress. But they do not realize that the ladder they climb was built by someone else. Its rungs, its rewards, and its illusions were all designed by hands more cunning than theirs. They think they are ascending, when in truth, they are simply obeying. The Stoic Epictetus warned that true wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Machiavelli, had he lived in our age of endless stimulation, would have sharpened that warning further. Today, people don't want less. They want more noise, more dopamine, more exposure. They call it freedom, but it is only dependency in disguise, because the man who needs money to feel powerful has already surrendered. Real strength is revealed when money arrives and nothing inside you shifts. This is the first law. Money does not create power, it only reveals it. You can see this every day. Watch the man who suddenly comes into wealth, through inheritance, through a raise, through sheer luck. He becomes loud, erratic, consumed with proving something. Why? Because he was not ready. The gold in his pocket did not fortify him. It unmasked his weakness. Jordan Peterson once observed, "If you think tough men are dangerous, wait until you see what weak men will do when they think they're strong." Wealth, to the unprepared, does exactly that. It inflates illusion into identity until the mask becomes indistinguishable from the man. Machiavelli's counsel is to pivot your aim. Do not chase money for the sake of appearance. Pursue instead the qualities that command respect without ever being spoken: discipline, emotional detachment, the ability to remain unpredictable. When these are yours, wealth will arrive as naturally as gravity, and when it does, it will not shout, it will not demand, it will simply obey. But this brings us to the second law, a truth most modern men despise. Because in a society addicted to showing, flaunting, and broadcasting, Machiavelli would whisper something darker. The moment your wealth becomes visible, so does your weakness. And that is the point where the vultures begin to circle. Wealth without mystery is weakness. Machiavelli understood that the moment others can calculate your riches, they begin to calculate your destruction. This is why princes throughout history concealed their true reserves, why bankers disguised their reach, and why the powerful of today move assets through trusts, shell companies, and invisible networks rather than through ostentatious displays. Consider the difference. One man buys a fleet of cars, streams his indulgence online, and imagines admiration will follow. Another hides his holdings behind layers of strategy, investing in assets you cannot see, pulling levers without announcing them. Which man is vulnerable? Which one walks with security? Machiavelli would say the first invites betrayal, while the second multiplies his power. Seneca once said, "The greatest wealth is a poverty of desires." But the Machiavellian adds to that, The greatest defense is a poverty of signals. When people cannot measure you, they fear misjudging you. When they cannot calculate your wealth, they hesitate to attack it. The less they know, the more they guess. The more they guess, the more they fear. This is why the Medici family, those quiet kings of Florence, ruled with shadows. Their fortunes were vast, yet they allowed rivals to underestimate them, to think their power was less than it truly was. And while others flaunted castles and parades, the Medici financed wars, shaped popes, and controlled cities. Modern billionaires repeat this pattern, hiding their structures behind layers of law. You may see their faces in headlines, but you will never see the architecture of their control. Which brings us to the third law. Never depend on money you do not control. Machiavelli warned that a prince who depends on mercenaries is doomed, for the loyalty of hired swords shifts with the wind. The modern mercenary is the paycheck. A salary looks like security, but it is dependence wrapped in ceremony. One phone call, one policy shift, one algorithm change, and the ground vanishes beneath your feet. Look at the men who thought corporate jobs meant independence, only to watch their livelihoods vanish overnight. Compare them to those who build systems, assets, streams of income, enterprises that do not beg permission to exist. Dependence, Machiavelli feared, is worse than poverty. For the poor man still holds his will, while the dependent man sells his soul to preserve comfort. He will bite his tongue, bow his head, and betray himself just to survive. This is why the Machiavellian does not chase applause or recognition. He builds fortresses, quiet streams of wealth, invisible structures that outlive his own presence. He does not need the spotlight because he has built the stage others perform upon. Yet even here, wealth is not finished with its revelations. For the fourth law is this: money is the most efficient test of loyalty ever devised. Words are cheap, promises are endless, but money introduces friction. It awakens envy. It tempts betrayal. Nietzsche warned that when you gaze into the abyss gazes back. But Machiavelli would say, when you rise, it is not the abyss that stares at you. It is your friends, your family, your allies, measuring, envying, calculating. Wealth does not corrupt them. It unmasks them. It shows you who was loyal to you and who was only loyal to your poverty. And here is the pivot Machiavelli leaves us with. The weak worship money itself, but the strong control access to it. Watch closely, for this is the dividing line between the masses who chase and the rulers who command. The question is not whether you have wealth. The question is whether you have become the one who decides where it flows. And once you cross that threshold, the entire game shifts. Because the world does not orbit those who hold gold, it orbits those who dispense it. But this brings us to the darker truth of the fifth law, one that decides whether you remain a player or become a ruler. The weak chase the coin. They scramble for checks, plead for promotions, and beg for raises. But Machiavelli reminds us, the strong do not run after money. They make others come to them for it. This is the fifth law. True power belongs not to the man who hoards wealth, but to the one who controls its distribution. Think of kings. Their treasuries mattered less than their ability to decide who received gold and who was left waiting. Their power was not in possession, but in permission. The Medici did not simply own money. They decided which artists, merchants, and politicians would flourish under their favor. In our own age, the principle repeats. Billionaires fund industries, shape political landscapes, and keep entire nations dependent on their capital. When you control the flow, you hold the crown. Which brings us to the sixth law. Always let others believe money is the prize. Machiavelli observed that men are governed more by appearances than by reality. So while others chase titles, raises, and applause, the wise ruler quietly engineers systems. Think of corporations that offer employees promotions and perks, while shareholders, unseen, set the true terms. The workers celebrate their bonuses. The shareholders dictate the game. This illusion keeps people occupied. They run faster, compete harder, striving for rewards that look like victory, but were designed to keep them in place. Meanwhile, the Machiavellian builds structures no one notices. He is not seduced by applause because he writes the rules others chase within. But illusions are only the beginning. The seventh law is more brutal. Use money to create comfort, then govern through the fear of losing it. Machiavelli wrote that men are more afraid of losing what they have than eager to gain what they don't. A prince should never give his people too much security, lest they forget their dependence. You see it in corporations that provide stable lifestyles yet retain the ability to revoke them at any moment. You see it in governments that grant benefits, then threaten their removal when obedience wanes. Men who once spoke boldly grow silent when comfort is at risk. They self-censor. They obey. They become careful not because they love the ruler, but because they fear exile from the system he controls. Machiavelli's tactic was never crude force. It was subtle dependence. He understood that once men tie their dignity to a lifestyle, they will warp their souls to preserve it. Most men would rather betray their principles than lose their comfort, so he gave them just enough to relax, but never enough to survive without him. But the trap grows deeper, for the eighth law warns us: visibility is liability. To flaunt wealth is to invite predators. A ruler who parades his riches does not inspire reverence. He awakens calculation. Rivals begin to measure his assets, his weaknesses, his defenses. The moment you become a symbol of wealth, you become a target for those who believe they deserve it more. Marcus Aurelius once reflected, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." Machiavelli would reframe this for the world of wealth. It is not poverty you should fear, but exposure. Because when people know what you own, they stop seeing you. They only see their chance. This is why the wise move in shadows. They build fortunes, but refuse to become them. They allow others to underestimate their reach, so that when their influence strikes, it strikes invisibly. Power without visibility is untouchable, and silence becomes its most effective shield. And yet, even silence is not the end, because the greatest test of all comes when money itself disappears. The ninth law is the crucible where most men fail. Become unshakable without wealth, for the man who fears starting over is already owned by what he possesses. But what does it mean to stand unshaken when wealth vanishes? And how does this paradox turn detachment into immortality? The ninth law is the crucible. Most men collapse when wealth is stripped from them because their identity was tied to what they owned. Take away their cars, their homes, their status, and they are hollow. But Machiavelli's lesson is different. The one who no longer fears loss becomes immortal. For nothing can be taken from the man who is willing to walk away. This detachment is not poverty. It is sovereignty. The prince who can abandon gold without trembling terrifies rivals. He can refuse deals that others would kill for. He can walk away from alliances, let others misunderstand him, even allow betrayal, and still remain unbroken. When wealth ceases to be a chain, it becomes a tool, and the one who wields it with detachment commands a power beyond calculation. Which leads us to the 10th law. He who controls the flow controls the frame. Machiavelli never trusted the man who merely possessed treasure. He trusted the one who determined where it went. Kings were powerful because they wrote the budget. Today, central banks move currencies, investors dictate markets, and philanthropists disguise influence as generosity. The appearance of wealth is irrelevant. The real power lies with those who decide its direction. But here comes the danger. Once you build such a system, the temptation will rise to reveal it, to show others how you did it, to teach the architecture. This is the trap Machiavelli warned against, and it is the 11th law. Never teach the system. Once others understand your engine, they can replicate it. Once they replicate it, they no longer need you. Every dynasty in history has fallen not because of invasion, but because power was diffused too widely. knowledge spread, and the ruler became disposable. So you guard your architecture. You let people marvel at results, but never explain the design. Mystery is protection. The less they know, the more they admire. The more they admire, the deeper their obedience. Once belief in your results outweighs their belief in themselves, you've crossed the line into psychological domination. They stop competing, they orbit. Not because you ordered it, but because they cannot imagine survival outside your gravity. And this is where the 12th law emerges. When you give, attach invisible strings. Machiavelli understood the subtlety of generosity. He did not give to be praised. He gave to create debt no one could repay. Offer aid when it is least expected, and men do not just thank you. They reshape their identity around your gesture. They censor themselves in your presence. They defend you without being asked. They become loyal not out of fear, but out of memory. And because you give sparingly, each favor grows sacred. Scarcity transforms your gift into an anchor in their soul. But even this is not the final step. For once you have mastered the mirror, concealed your reach, controlled dependency, and bound loyalty with invisible threads, the 13th law arrives. Build a life where money is present, but not loud. The powerful do not need to flaunt. They move like shadows. Their value is assumed, their influence unspoken. They sign contracts in silence. They leave meetings before decisions are finalized, because the decisions were already shaped around their absence. They are not powerful because they are seen. They are powerful because their necessity is felt. This is sovereign silence, the final form of wealth and power. It is not the applause of crowds or the noise of trophies. It is the calm of a man who has built structures that survive collapse, who has outgrown the need to prove anything. His wealth does not speak, yet the world bends toward him. His absence punishes more than his presence ever could. And this is the endgame Machiavelli hinted at, to rise beyond wealth itself, to stop chasing the illusion of money, and instead become the silent condition others cannot live without. When you reach this stage, you stop playing by rules. You write them. You no longer beg for recognition, because you have built a reality that orbits you without question. The choice, then, is yours. You can keep chasing the ladder someone else designed, or you can begin building the architecture no one else understands. Just remember, fortune submits to the bold, but she stays with those who never need to announce her.